Whispers in the kingdom claimed that Alpha King Riker could never be moved by a woman. The most beautiful daughters of noble houses presented themselves to him, yet he turned them all away. Some believed he was cursed, while others thought him irreparably damaged. The reality, however, was a far darker secret. The Alpha King harbored a craving he could never admit, an obsession born from a violation he suffered as a boy. It was a fetish no highborn lady could ever fulfill until he laid eyes on her. Lyra, the hybrid bride, innocent and untouched, was his ideal quarry. And on their wedding night, with the chamber doors securely bolted, the command that would destroy her innocence was finally uttered. "Get on the bed. Open for me. I want to watch." The great hall was saturated with the scents of alpha musk and burning beeswax. Long shadows clung to the throne where Riker, the Alpha King, sat with a jawline that seemed forged from iron and eyes that betrayed nothing. For 3 years, the great families had presented their daughters, exquisite, adorned, and desperate to wear his crown. He had rejected each one with the same icy indifference. His court murmured among themselves, questioning if their king was impotent, hexed, or simply broken. None of them knew the truth. None knew that at 15, Riker had been trapped by the palace maids. Their cruel laughter still echoed in his mind, a tormenting sound as they forced him to remain still while they touched him against his will. His body had responded, but his spirit had recoiled, and in that moment, something inside him was permanently warped. He no longer wanted to be touched. He needed to be in command. He needed to watch. For years, he had searched for someone who could appease that dark appetite. The noble women, with their confident and practiced allure, could never provide what he truly craved: obedience in its most unadulterated form, an innocence revealed not through desire, but through fear and total surrender. Then he saw Lyra. She was standing at the far end of the hall, dressed in plain linen with her head bowed. She hadn't been paraded like the others, nor was she draped in jewels or scented like a treasure to be won. She was trembling, as delicate as fine china, and in that tremor, a fire ignited in Riker's chest. This one, he knew, this one would open for him. Her parents accepted his proposal without a moment's hesitation. No one would dare say no to the king. For them, it was an immense honor, a path to greater influence. Their daughter would become queen, and that was the only thing that mattered. Nobody bothered to ask Lyra if her heart was soaring or shattering. The wedding ceremony was a hazy sequence of oaths and traditions. She moved like a phantom, utterly numb, her rose-adorned veil feeling impossibly heavy. When the guests erupted in cheers, she felt only a creeping dread, knowing that once the feast and the wine were finished, she would be handed over to the king. He would finally claim what he had spent years waiting for. The chamber doors swung shut, and the heavy bolts slid into their slots. Riker stood on the other side of the room, his wide shoulders silhouetted by the incoming moonlight. Lyra's hands trembled against the fabric of her wedding gown. "My king," she breathed, her voice as thin as spun glass. His gaze pierced through her. "You are untouched," her throat constricted. "Yes, my lord. I was kept pure for you." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then, Riker's lips twisted into a smile that held no warmth, only something far more sinister. He finally moved toward her, his presence seeming to consume all the air in the room. His eyes were not on her dress or her crown, but on her quivering legs. "You anticipate pain," he stated, his voice low and almost brutal. "You expect me to take you. But that is not what I desire." Lyra's brow furrowed in confusion as a prickle of fear ran across her skin. "Then what do you desire?" Riker leaned in, his warm breath ghosting over her ear. His command was sharp and absolute. "Get on the bed. Open for me. And let me watch." Her heart almost ceased to beat. She was certain she had misheard, but his eyes were burning with intensity, his jaw set. He was serious. A wave of shame washed over her. To expose herself, not to be held or touched, but to be observed like a spectacle. She shook her head, her voice fracturing. "My king, I cannot. You can." His tone was unyielding. He took a step back, crossing his arms, his gaze never leaving her. Do you understand why I selected you, Lyra? Why I dismissed every other woman in this kingdom? She swallowed, unable to form words. Because they were bold. They were taught to entice. They would never give me what I need. But you, his voice dropped, becoming guttural and menacing. You will obey. You will open yourself, and I will find my pleasure in watching every single breath you dare to release. Her pulse hammered. The room felt small and suffocating. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. But another, quieter voice inside her whispered, if I disobey, what will he do to me? Her knees felt weak as she moved to the bed. She lay back, her hands shaking as she lifted the hem of her gown. Her entire body was screaming with humiliation, but Riker's hungry, sharp, and relentless eyes consumed her. And in that instant, Lyra understood her fate. She was not his queen, his bride, or his love. She was his fetish, and the Alpha King would never be satisfied until every last bit of her innocence was stripped away under his watchful gaze. The chamber was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Lyra remained on the bed as she was told, her gown gathered at her thighs, her body quaking as if the very sheets beneath her were aflame. The pressure of his stare was more burdensome than any physical chains. King Riker made no move to approach her. He did not touch her. He simply watched. His arms were crossed over his chest, his posture rigid, his breathing measured. Yet beneath that controlled exterior, his hunger was a roaring inferno. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. What sort of man was this? What kind of king demanded not to possess, but to observe? A chilling fear spread through her chest. She had braced herself for pain, for force, for the savage claiming that all the rumors had warned of. But this was stranger, somehow more degrading. She had never conceived that her own shame would be the very thing he most desired. Riker's voice broke the silence, low, steady, and unyielding. Wider, her breath hitched. My lord, do not force me to repeat myself. Lyra, her hands trembled as she complied, parting her legs further, her cheeks searing with humiliation. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. She longed to turn her face away, but something in his gaze held her captive, as though he had bound her with invisible ropes. Riker's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he exhaled slowly. To see her tremble, to watch her innocence disintegrate under the weight of his command, it fed the hunger that had been carved into him so long ago. He spoke once more, his tone softer but no less demanding. Tell me what you are feeling. Lyra's lips quivered. Shame, my lord. Shame and fear. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his features. Good. Hold on to that. Let it burn you. She swallowed, her throat parched, her heart hammering against her ribs. Yet even as shame consumed her, something else began to stir, something she didn't dare to name. His gaze was unbearable, yet it made her feel seen in a way no one had ever bothered to see her before. Her parents had sold her like livestock. The nobles had never truly looked at her. She had always been invisible. But here, under Riker's relentless stare, she was undeniably present. And that realization terrified her more than his command. Riker's voice grew harsher, more urgent, as if the words were being dragged from his very soul. They mocked me once. They forced me, made me stand helpless while they laughed. They believed they had broken me, his fists clenched at his sides, his voice dropping to a snarl. But they gave me this hunger to watch, this need to see obedience burn away all resistance. Lyra's eyes widened as tears finally escaped. In that confession, she saw not just cruelty, but a wound so profound it had been twisted into a weapon. My king, she whispered. Do not pity me, he snarled, taking a step closer. His eyes glinted like a predator's. Do not look at me with mercy. Obey me. That is all I require. She nodded shakily, forcing her body to remain still, to endure the weight of his eyes. Minutes crawled by, long, unbearable minutes where her shame intensified until it felt like a fire beneath her skin. Yet in that fire, her fear began to transform. Her breaths became shallow and quick. A confusing heat pooled low in her belly, betraying her. Why is my body responding to him? She thought, horrified. Riker noticed it. The tremor of her chest, the flush rising in her throat. His eyes narrowed, his breath catching. For the first time, he felt the beginnings of satisfaction. Not just because she obeyed, but because her innocence was cracking under his gaze, revealing the hidden embers of curiosity he so desperately wanted to ignite. He moved to the bedside, his shadow falling over her. She tensed, expecting him to finally touch her, but he didn't. He only leaned closer, his voice rough with restraint. "Do you feel it?" She blinked, startled. "Feel what, my lord?" "The heat, the shame, the confusion." "That is what I want," her chest heaved as she whispered. "Yes, my lord." A sound escaped him, a guttural exhale that was half growl, half groan. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment like a man tasting wine after years of thirst. For Riker, this was a victory, not a conquest of force, but obedience by command. Not passion from touch, but hunger born from her trembling surrender. And for Lyra, it was ruin, because in that moment, she knew a part of her had begun to bend. Not broken, not yet, but bending under the weight of his gaze. Bending towards something she feared she might never escape. He straightened, his tone sharp again. "This is only the beginning. Every night you will obey, and every night I will watch, until your shame becomes the very thing you crave." Lyra's lips parted, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to deny it, to fight. But no sound emerged, because a traitorous part of her already knew his words might one day come true. The fire burned low, shadows creeping across the chamber walls. Riker finally turned away, his shoulders tense, his hunger momentarily sated. Lyra lay trembling, her body trapped between horror and a dangerous, forbidden spark of desire. And she realized she was not just his bride. She was his fetish, his wound, his salvation. And her fear was only the beginning. The fire had long since died down, leaving the chamber bathed in murky shadows. Lyra lay perfectly still, though her body quaked with the memory of what had just occurred. She had obeyed. She had exposed herself to his gaze, and while shame gnawed at her, a darker truth terrified her even more. Her body had betrayed her. Across the room, Riker hadn't moved for what seemed like an eternity. He stood near the hearth, his broad back turned to her, his fists clenched as if in a struggle with himself. His silhouette was a dark shape against the firelight, his shoulders rigid, his jaw tight. Why does he not touch me? Lyra Vaughn did it. Why does he only observe me, as if I am a spectacle created solely for his eyes? Her thoughts became a tangled mess of shame. She had braced herself for him to ravage her, as all the stories of Alpha Kings promised. Instead, his command had been stranger, more unbearable, and yet his eyes had burned as if he derived more pleasure from her trembling obedience than from anything else. At last, he turned. His gaze struck her like a physical blow, and she stiffened beneath its weight. "You obeyed," he said quietly. His voice was low and gravelly, but beneath it ran a dangerous current of satisfaction. "But obedience once is not enough. I will have it again and again, until it consumes you." Lyra's breath hitched. She clutched the sheets to her chest, desperate for some kind of barrier, but his stare stripped her bare regardless of what she held. "My lord," her voice quavered, "why do you refuse to take me as a husband should? Why must you only watch?" For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then he moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. He halted at the edge of the bed, looming over her. "Because that is not what I crave," he growled. "To touch you is nothing. To see you, helpless, burning, trembling under the weight of my gaze, that is everything." Her pulse thundered in her ears. His words felt like chains wrapping around her throat. She dared not move, dared not even breathe. Riker leaned down, his lips close to her ear. "You ask why I do not claim you as others would. Because they took that from me long ago. They made me stand still while they forced my body to betray me. They laughed as I hardened against my will. I was powerless, stripped of choice. That night forged the hunger in me. I will never let another woman's touch rule me. I will rule. I will command. And you will obey. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She felt the crushing weight of his wound, his past, the shadow that had shaped him, but her fear smothered any compassion. He was not gentle or tender. He was raw need sharpened into an obsession. She shook her head weakly. I do not know if I can bear this. You can. His voice was like iron. His hand closed around her wrist, not with passion, but with authority. He pressed her hand against her own body, his gaze locking onto hers. Expose yourself to me again. Her throat went dry. My lord, do it. Her lips trembled. Slowly, with a shaking hand, she obeyed. She revealed herself again, the shame slicing through her like a razor. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she felt his eyes on her, scorching, relentless, devouring. Every flinch, every gasp seemed to fuel him. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his arousal evident in the dark swell beneath his trousers, but he made no move to reach for her. He only watched, his hunger deepening with every quiver of her body. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, tears spilling free. Why do you make me do this? She whispered brokenly. Why do you take joy in my shame? Riker bent closer, his voice harsh against her ear. Because shame is truth. Because in your trembling, I see you stripped of every mask, every pretense. When you bare yourself, there are no lies. Only obedience. Only surrender. His words sank into her bones. She hated him for it. And yet, her body responded again, betraying her with a heated and trembling ache. He saw it. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling in cruel satisfaction. You feel it, don't you? The burn between shame and desire. Do not deny it, she sobbed, shaking her head. No, I do not. I cannot. You can, he growled. His hand pressed her wrist harder, forcing her to remain bare. Your body answers me, even as your lips lie. And I will watch you until your lips confess what your body already knows. Lyra's chest heaved, her shame crushing her, her body betraying her. She had never felt so humiliated, yet never so consumed. Riker straightened, his eyes blazing. He did not touch her, though every muscle in his body trembled with restraint. His arousal strained, his hunger gnawed, but he refused to take what every instinct screamed for. Instead, he fed only on her trembling surrender. This is my power, he said, his voice rough with need. And it is your curse. You're mine, Lyra. My bride, my fetish, my salvation. I will not touch you. I will not need to. You will bear yourself to me, and I will watch until the shame you fear becomes the fire you crave. Lyra's tears streaked her cheeks. Yet as she lay trembling beneath his gaze, she felt it, the seed of something dangerous stirring inside her. A curiosity, a spark that frightened her more than his commands, because part of her wondered if one day she might crave it too. Riker turned away at last, his body taut with restraint, his hunger momentarily sated. Lyra curled into herself, sobbing silently. But even as she wept, the heat in her belly betrayed her, and she knew this was only the beginning. His obsession had taken root, and it would grow, consuming them both. The following night, Lyra prayed the king's strange hunger had been satisfied, that perhaps what had happened to his chamber had been a cruel whim, a passing madness he would not repeat. But when the fire dimmed and the bolt slid once more across the chamber doors, she saw it in his eyes, the same burning demand. Riker stood tall, his presence filling the room like a shadow that smothered every flame. His gaze pinned her where she sat on the edge of the bed. Rise, he commanded. Her heart seized. My lord, do not speak. Not tonight. From this night onward, silence is your obedience. Her breath caught. Silence. The thought chilled her. She wanted to plead, to resist, but one look at his face silenced her faster than any words could. He gestured toward the bed. Body yourself. Open. Obey. Her lips trembled as she shook her head. Please, I cannot. Riker's eyes hardened. Without a word, he turned from her, walked to the hearth, and stood with his back to her. His silence cut deeper than his voice. The cold distance pressed against her chest until she felt she could not breathe. Riker, she whispered, breaking her own promise of silence. He had not turned, did not move, did not speak. Tears stung her eyes. She realized then that his cruelty was not in striking her, nor in force. It was in withdrawal. He denied her his presence, denied her even the smallest kindness of acknowledgement, and somehow it hurt worse than his command. Her voice cracked. I will try still." He did not answer. The silence suffocated her, demanding her surrender. Shaking, she lay back on the bed, her hands trembling as she pushed the gown from her body. She bared herself as he had commanded before, her breath shallow, her shame burning hot against her skin. Only then did he turn, his gaze locked onto her, sharp as a predator's. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. "Good," he said at last, his voice gravel-laced with restraint. "But do not speak again. In silence, you will learn obedience. Every word unsaid is surrender. Every breath stolen is mine." Her cheeks flushed, her tears hot. She clenched her fists against the sheets, fighting the humiliation twisting in her chest. Why must he only watch? Why does this thrill him so? Riker stepped closer, though still he did not touch. He stood over her, drinking in every flinch, every quiver. The sight of her trembling body, stripped by her own hands, her lips sealed in silence, it consumed him. His hunger pulsed like fire through his veins. And though she told herself she hated him, though she told herself she would not feel what he demanded, her body betrayed her. Heat coiled low in her belly, her chest rising and falling with quickened breath. He saw it, his lips curled, his jaw tightening with satisfaction. "You resist me," he murmured, "but your body does not. It answers me even when your heart denies me. This is why I chose you, Lyra. Not because you are beautiful, not because you are untouched, but because only you will break in the way I crave." She shut her eyes, tears slipping free. No, I will not." But he was right. Her body quivered with a heat she could not smother. Riker remained motionless except for the tremor of his chest as he breathed her surrender in like smoke. He ached to touch, to take, but he refused himself. The watching was enough. The watching was everything. At last he spoke again, his voice like thunder rolling low. "This will be your ritual. Each night you will bear yourself in silence. You will obey my commands without a word. And if you defy me, if you resist, I will not punish you with hands or chains. I will punish you with cold distance, with denial. You will beg me for my gaze before long, Lyra. And when you do, you will understand that you were made for me." Her breath broke. Terror choked her because a part of her already knew his words might be true. Already in his silence, she had felt a hollow ache so unbearable it had forced her obedience. She curled inward, trembling beneath his eyes, her lips pressed shut, holding back every cry, every protest, for she understood now. Every word spoken was disobedience. Every sound was rebellion. And so she obeyed. Riker watched her until the night was deep and the fire burned to ash. His hunger throbbed, his restraint strained, but his satisfaction was undeniable. For every quiver of her body, every silent sob, every inch of obedience fed his obsession. When at last he turned away, Lyra lay broken with shame, yet her body burned traitorous, aching in ways she could not comprehend. She hated him. She hated herself more. And as sleep stole her, one truth whispered through her mind. She was not only his bride. She was his ritual. The days blurred into a ritual. Each night, Lyra obeyed. Each night, she lay in silence, bearing herself beneath the king's devouring eyes. Her lips were sealed, her body trembled, her shame was unbearable. But tonight was different. Riker stood by the chamber door, his presence as sharp as the moonlight spilling through the high window. His gaze pinned her, his jaw locked, as though he had been holding this command on his tongue for too long. "Rise," he said. Lyra startled, clutching the sheets. Her body still ached from the nights before. Ached not from his touch, but from the strange fire his eyes alone had awakened in her. She prayed tonight might pass quietly, but his voice came low and heavy. Tonight, you will not only bear yourself. Tonight, you will touch yourself for me." Her heart stopped. Her blood ran cold. She stared at him, eyes wide, lips parting in horror. "No, my lord. Please do not make me." His hand lifted, silencing her. "You speak too much. You disobey too quickly. Do you think I will be swayed by your pleas? No, you will obey." Her chest heaved, her nails digging into the sheets. "I cannot," she whispered, tears brimming. "Not before your eyes. Not in shame." Riker's eyes blazed, hunger and cruelty mingling in their depths. He stepped forward, his shadow swallowing her. "You think your shame is yours to keep? No, it belongs to me now. Your body, your fear, your trembling obedience. It is mine, and you will give it to me." Her breath hitched as he leaned close, his voice brushing her ear. "Touch yourself, Lyra. Let me watch." She shook her head desperately, sobs breaking free. "Please, my king, anything but this. Do not make me do it." His tone cracked like a whip. "Or I will deny you even the comfort of my gaze. You will lie alone in the cold, invisible to me. Is that what you want?" Her sobs choked into silence because she remembered that punishment, the cold absence of his eyes, the way it hollowed her until she obeyed, and she feared it more than she feared her shame. Her trembling hand drifted downward. She hesitated, frozen, tears streaking her cheeks. "Wider," he commanded. She obeyed, every movement a war within her. Her body screamed humiliation, her soul burned with dread. Yet as her fingers brushed the forbidden place, a jolt of heat shot through her belly, betraying her. "No," she gasped, horrified by her own response. "Yes," Riker growled, his eyes searing into her. "Do not stop until I tell you." Her body shook as she obeyed, every touch agony and shame. She wept, begging him with her eyes. But his gaze was relentless, devouring her every gasp, every twitch. Her mind screamed to resist, but her body betrayed her again and again, the heat building, her breath quickening. She could not bear it, could not understand how shame twisted into this unbearable ache. "Do you feel it?" he demanded, his voice harsh. She sobbed. "Yes, my lord, say it," he snapped. I feel it." His chest heaved, his arousal straining, but still he did not touch her. His obsession fed only on her surrender. "Good. You will feel it until it breaks you. Until shame and desire are one and the same." Her cries filled the chamber as her innocence cracked, torn apart by his relentless command. And Riker, his eyes dark, his voice rough, watched every second, savoring her fall as though it were the finest wine. When it was over, Lyra curled into herself, sobbing, her body trembling from what she had done. She felt ruined, hollow, filthy. But Riker's gaze was satisfied, his hunger fed. He turned from her, his voice low and merciless. "This is your fate, Lyra. You're mine to watch, mine to break. And tomorrow night, you will do it again." And as the chamber doors locked them in darkness, Lyra knew her innocence was gone, burned away not by touch, but by the gaze that consumed her. The chamber was still heavy with the echo of her sobs from the night before. Lyra had curled into herself after obeying his shameful command, but sleep never came. When dawn spilled through the high windows, she felt hollow, as if her innocence had been buried in the ashes of the hearth. Yet that night, when the doors bolted shut again, she found Riker different. He did not bark his command immediately. He did not stride forward with that predatory certainty. Instead, he stood by the window, staring out at the moon. His posture was rigid, but his silence was restless. Lyra sat on the bed, clutching the sheets to her chest. Fear coiled in her belly. Silence was worse than orders, because silence meant he was thinking, and when he thought, his eyes grew darker. At last he spoke, his voice low, gravel-edged with memory. "You want to know why I watch? Why I hunger for your shame?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded, barely, her heart pounding. He turned then, and the look in his eyes nearly unseated her. "They were not just cruel tonight, they were haunted. When I was 15, he began, his voice rough as if torn from him. The palace maidens found me alone. Older, stronger, bold in their wickedness. They thought it amusing to test the young alpha Lyra's breath caught. They cornered me, laughed, stripped me with their eyes. They touched me, commanded me to stand while they made a spectacle of my body. I hated them. I hated myself because my body betrayed me, hardened beneath their hands, and their laughter, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground. Their laughter carved itself into me. He paced, his hands clenched into fists, his voice growing darker with every word. I swore never again. Never again would a woman's touch rule me. Never again would I be powerless. Lyra's heart throbbed painfully in her chest. She had not expected this, not the raw wound beneath his cruelty. His gaze snapped to her, sharp and consuming. So I watch. I command. I take power where it was once stolen. I need to see obedience, not defiance. I need to strip every shield, every pretense, until all that remains is truth. Raw, trembling, undeniable, her lips trembled. And I am your truth. Yes, his voice broke for just a breath before hardening again. You are untouched, pure. You give me what no noble harlot ever could. Obedience born of innocence. That is why I chose you, Lyra. Not for love, not for beauty, but because only you could feed the hunger forged in me that night. Tears blurred her eyes. She should have hated him more, should have recoiled from the monster his confession revealed. And yet, for the first time, she saw not just the king who commanded her shame, but the boy who had once been stripped of his own. Her voice cracked. My king, they hurt you, he snarled, his body stiffening. Do not pity me, I do not, she whispered, clutching the sheets tighter. But I see you, those words silenced him. For the first time since their union, he faltered. His chest heaved, his gaze wavered. He stepped closer, towering over her once more. But there was no command on his tongue this time. Only a confession that trembled with restraint. You should fear me. You should despise me. And yet you speak as if I am more than this hunger. What? Her tears slipped free, trailing down her cheeks. Because no one else has ever let me see them. My parents never saw me. The court never saw me. You are cruel, my king. But in your cruelty, at least you are bare. His breath caught, his eyes narrowing as if her words were a blade plunged straight into him. He leaned closer, his lips brushing the air by her ear. His whisper was not a command this time. It was a confession. You do not understand what you awaken in me, Lyra. You are both my salvation and my ruin. Her heart twisted, torn between terror and a dangerous tenderness she could not suppress. And in that moment, though shame still burned in her veins, she saw the fracture in his armor, the wound beneath the crown, and their bond, though built on twisted ground, deepened. That night, when she lay trembling in silence once more, his eyes still consumed her, but differently. He watched, yes, but his gaze carried not only hunger, but something fragile, buried, unspoken. And Lyra knew the king's obsession was no longer just about power. It was about the scarred boy who still lived inside him. And that boy had chained her as much as the man ever could. The chamber was thick with silence, but it was no longer the suffocating silence of punishment. It was charged like the air before a storm. Lyra lay beneath the canopy bed, the sheets twisted around her, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She could still hear Riker's voice from the night before, his confession of the maidens, the shame, the laughter that had carved into him a hunger only she could satisfy. It should have made her despise him. It should have made her recoil. But instead, it had unsettled her in another way. Because for the first time, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel discarded like a pawn in her parents' hands. The king's eyes, cruel though they were, saw her. They demanded her. And something inside her ached at the thought of being wanted so fiercely, even in so twisted a way. When the bolts slid shut again that night, Riker entered as always tall, broad, a shadow of command, his eyes locked onto her, sharp and unyielding. On the bed, he ordered. She shivered, expecting the usual dread to rise. But instead, a strange heat flushed her cheeks. Her body moved almost before her mind caught up. She slipped onto the bed, spreading herself as commanded, her breath trembling not with terror, but with something perilously close to anticipation. Riker froze, his eyes widening only slightly, but enough to betray his surprise. For nights he had seen her resist, sob, hesitate until he broke her with cold silence. But now, she obeyed without a word, without hesitation. "Lyra," his voice was rough, almost disbelieving. "Do you know what you are doing?" Her lips parted. She should have said no. She should have begged him not to make her. But the words that fell from her tongue shocked even her. "Yes, my lord." His chest rose sharply. He stepped closer, his gaze dark, his arousal sharpening with every second. He circled her like a predator circling prey, but beneath his hunger flickered something else. Uncertainty. "Why?" he demanded. His tone was harsh, but his eyes searched hers as though afraid of the answer. Her cheeks burned, her heart racing. "Because I do not want your silence again. Because when you look at me, I feel seen." And because her voice faltered, trembling, but she forced the words out. "Because my body does not fear you anymore." A guttural sound escaped him, half growl, half groan. He gripped the edge of the bed, his knuckles white. For years, he had believed no woman could ever embrace his hunger, that he would forever be cursed to watch, to command, never to be understood. But now his bride, his hybrid bride, offered her obedience freely. "Lyra," he whispered, her name rough in his throat. She trembled beneath his gaze, but this time it was not in terror. Heat coiled in her belly, shame mingling with a budding desire she had no name for. She spread herself wider, unbidden, her breath catching as his eyes devoured her. Riker's jaw clenched, his restraint nearly shattering. His arousal strained, his hunger roared, but still he did not touch her. He only watched, every muscle taut, as though one wrong move would break him apart. "Do you know what you do to me?" he said hoarsely. Her voice was soft, trembling but steady. "I only obey, my lord." "No," he growled, shaking his head, his eyes burning into her. "You do more. You undo me." She gasped as he leaned closer, his breath hot against her skin. His voice was a growl thick with need. "You're not just enduring my hunger. You're feeding it. And if you are not careful, Lyra, you will come to crave it as I do." Her body shuddered at the words, because deep inside, a spark of truth burned. A dangerous truth she dared not admit aloud. She already did. When he turned away at last, forcing himself to keep his distance, his chest heaved as though he had fought a battle. Lyra curled beneath the sheets, her cheeks flushed, her body trembling with forbidden heat. And in the quiet of the chamber, both of them knew the balance had shifted. The bride was no longer just afraid. She was awakening, and the king was beginning to fear his own obsession more than ever. The chamber had become their ritual. Each night, Lyra obeyed. Each night, Riker's eyes consumed her. But on the 8th night, he was different. He paced the chamber like a predator caged too long. His hunger burned hotter, sharper, restless, as though the walls themselves could no longer contain it. Lyra watched him, her body still trembling from her awakening the night before. She had obeyed him willingly, desire stirring where once there had only been fear. That dangerous spark terrified her, but also bound her to him more tightly than chains ever could. At last, he turned to her, eyes blazing. "Rise," she stood, clutching her gown, her pulse quickening. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and guttural, "this chamber is not enough. Tonight, you will obey me where others might hear, where shadows might betray us, where discovery could cost us both." Her breath caught. Terror iced her veins. "My lord, please." His hand lifted, silencing her. "You swore obedience. Do not falter now." She shook her head weakly. "If someone sees, then they will see who rules you," he snarled, stepping closer, his shadow devouring her. "They will see the king's bride stripped of shame, bearing herself not for touch, but for his eyes alone. And none will dare speak of it." Her knees weakened, shame burning her cheeks. Yet beneath the terror was a heat that shamed her even more, the same treacherous fire that had risen within her before. He gripped her wrist, pulling her from the chamber. The corridors were dim, lit only by torches. Every echo of their steps rang like a drumbeat of danger. Riker stopped in a narrow alcove between towering stone pillars. He pressed her back against the cold wall, his body looming, his eyes alight with hunger. "Lift your gown," he ordered. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. "No, my king. Please." Not here. His hand slammed against the stone beside her head, the sound sharp in the silence. "Do it," she trembled, eyes darting to the corridor. A guard could pass. A servant could stumble upon them. The thought of discovery suffocated her, but his eyes, his relentless burning eyes, demanded obedience, and her body, traitorous, burned with a heat that defied her fear. With shaking hands, she lifted the hem of her gown. Riker's breath hissed between his teeth. He did not touch her. He only stepped back half a pace, his gaze devouring every inch of her trembling form. "Wider," he commanded. She obeyed, tears of humiliation pricking her eyes. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, my lord." "Not here." "Silence," he growled. "Every word you speak is disobedience. Let your body answer me." Only that. Her chest heaved. The cold stone at her back contrasted with the heat flooding her body. Her shame twisted with a darker, more dangerous ache. Riker's hunger sharpened, his arousal straining. Every flinch of hers, every fearful gasp fed him. He had never felt so alive, so powerful, so undone. And yet beneath his satisfaction was something perilous, a recklessness that had never stirred in him before. For the first time, he wanted her obedience not only in the safety of shadows, but in the peril of discovery. He leaned close, his lips grazing her ear. His voice was a growl of command and confession. "You are mine, Lyra. Not only here, not only in secret. You will bear yourself wherever I demand. Even if the whole court stands watching." Her body shuddered, tears streaking her cheeks, and yet her legs parted further, unbidden, as if her body answered him before her mind could resist. His eyes darkened, his chest heaving. For years he had believed his fetish was a curse no one could endure. But now his hybrid bride obeyed, not only in silence, but in shameful, trembling desire. When he finally released her, leading her back to the chamber, Lyra's legs trembled with every step. She hated herself for obeying. She hated the fire that burned in her veins. But she knew the truth now. It was no longer fear alone that ruled her. It was something worse. And Riker, the Alpha King whose hunger had been caged so long, knew he could never stop. His fetish had become obsession. His obsession had become power. And now his power was consuming them both. The corridors of the palace echoed hollowly in the dead of night. Torches flickered, shadows stretched, and Lyra's bare feet whispered against the stone as Riker led her by the wrist. His grip was firm, unyielding, not harsh but absolute. She followed in silence, though her heart pounded with dread. She knew this path, the long hall, the towering arch, the double doors carved with wolves and moons, the throne room. She faltered, her breath catching. "My lord." "Quiet," Riker growled, not looking back. Her throat tightened. She obeyed. The doors groaned open under his hand, the vast chamber yawning before them. Moonlight spilled through the high windows, silvering the floor of black marble. At the far end, upon a dais of carved stone, loomed his throne, immense, crowned with wolf heads, draped in furs. It was the place where he ruled the court, where nobles bowed, where justice was declared and punishments dealt. And tonight, it was where he would break her further. He released her wrist and strode to the throne, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the vast, empty hall. He turned, lowering himself onto the seat with the weight of a king, his broad shoulders filling the wolf-carved back. His eyes found hers across the chamber, blazing, unyielding. "Come forward." Lyra's legs trembled as she walked the long expanse of stone. Each step was heavier than the last, her shame tightening around her like chains. When she reached the dais, she bowed her head, clutching her gown against her chest. "Look at me," he commanded. She lifted her gaze. His expression was carved from stone, his hunger cloaked in authority. "This is not just my throne," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It is the heart of this kingdom. It is where power lives, where wolves bow, where laws are forged, where lives are ended." Her breath trembled. "And it is where you will learn to obey me forever." Her knees buckled. "My lord, please, not here." Silence, his tone cracked like thunder. "You are mine. Here, most of all. Now, bear yourself, Lyra. Bear yourself before your king." Tears burn her eyes. She shook her head, trembling. "I cannot." His jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a growl that reverberated in her bones. "If you defy me now, I will leave you unseen. I will not look at you for a week, and you will rot in silence. Unseen, untouched, unacknowledged. Do you want that?" Her breath caught. The memory of his cold absence was worse than any humiliation. To be invisible to him, it had nearly destroyed her once. Her hands shook violently as she loosened her gown. The fabric slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. The cold air of the vast hall struck her bare skin, making her shiver violently. Riker's eyes devoured her. He leaned forward on the throne, his breath harsh, his arousal barely contained. He did not touch her. He only watched. "Wider," he ordered. Her legs parted, her body trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. "This," he said, his voice low, resonant, "is your true coronation. Not the vows spoken before the court, not the crown upon your head, but this, your obedience before my throne." Her shame scorched her, yet deep inside, heat coiled. She hated it. She hated herself, and yet she obeyed. Every gasp, every quiver, every tear, he savored them all. His hunger grew until he gripped the arms of the throne to restrain himself, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched. "Lyra," he growled, his voice breaking under the weight of his obsession. "You will never forget this night. You are bound to me not by crown or vow, but by the fire of your shame, the surrender of your body, and the hunger of my eyes." "This is eternity," she sobbed, collapsing to her knees at the base of the dais, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. Yet even there, broken and trembling, she spread herself wider as commanded, giving him everything. And Riker, the king feared by all, groaned low and guttural, undone not by war nor by crown, but by the sight of the bride who had become both his ruin and his salvation. The throne room fell silent, but for the sound of their breaths, her ragged, shamed sobs, and his harsh, restrained growls. When at last he rose, his footsteps echoed like judgment. He pulled her gown back over her shoulders, his voice low against her ear. "Never forget, Lyra, you're mine everywhere, even here, especially here." And as he led her back through the vast chamber, she knew that her obedience was no longer confined to the bedchamber. It belonged to the throne, to the crown, to the kingdom itself. The throne room was still heavy with the ghost of Lyra's shame. When the morning court gathered, she walked at Riker's side, her head bowed, her body aching with the memory of what he had made her do beneath the eyes of the moon and the wolf-carved throne. But the whispers had begun. Eyes followed her, not with reverence, but with curiosity, with suspicion. And among them stood Lady Seraphina, golden-haired, beautiful, once paraded as a would-be queen. She had long desired Riker's hand, long envied the timid hybrid bride who had stolen the crown without effort. Seraphina's gaze burned holes through Lyra's lowered head. She smirked, her lips curling with venom as she leaned close to a cluster of courtiers. Strange, is it not? The king who once spurned every noble lady now clings to a trembling girl who can barely speak. Laughter rippled. The words spread like smoke. Lyra felt the weight of those whispers. Her cheeks burned. She could not lift her head, could not meet their eyes. Shame coiled around her throat like a rope, choking her. Later, in the shadow of a corridor, Seraphina cornered her. The noblewoman's eyes glittered with cruelty, her smile as sharp as a blade. "Do you think we do not see it?" Seraphina hissed. "The way he looks at you, the way you shake whenever he speaks. You are not his queen. You are his plaything." Lyra's breath caught, her hands trembling at her sides. Seraphina leaned closer, her voice low and poisonous. They will know, little bride. They will know why he chose you. Not for love, not for power. For your shame. For your trembling obedience. Tears stung Lyra's eyes. She turned, fleeing down the corridor, her sobs echoing in the stone. That night, when the chamber doors closed, she broke. She wept openly before Riker, clutching her gown to her chest. They know, she sobbed. They whisper. They laugh. They say I am nothing but your weakness. Riker's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. His chest rose and fell with harsh breaths, rage coiling through him like fire. Who? His voice was low, deadly. She shook her head, tears spilling. Lady Seraphina. She taunts me. She spreads her poison. My king, I cannot bear it. Silence. Riker's eyes darkened until they were almost black. The next day, before the full court, he rose from his throne. His voice thundered through the hall. Whispers have reached my ears, he growled. Rumors of my queen's worth. Insults spat in shadow by those too cowardly to speak before me. The courtiers stilled. Seraphina's smile faltered. Riker turned, his gaze falling on Lyra. She trembled, her heart pounding as his eyes devoured her even here before the court. He stepped down from the dais, towering over her, his voice as sharp as a blade. Let them see, he declared. Let them see the truth of my bride. His hand gripped her chin, lifting her face to the court. His gaze never left hers, burning, commanding. She felt the heat of his eyes, the weight of his dominance. And even here, before the watching nobles, her body betrayed her. Her breath trembled, her lips parted, her shame burned her cheeks. The court gasped. Some averted their eyes, some stared, stunned, but all understood. Whatever bound the king and his bride was not weakness. It was power, raw and terrifying. Seraphina paled, her lips pressed thin. Riker's voice dropped low and merciless. This is not weakness. This is obedience. This is mine. And let every wolf in this hall remember, to mock her is to mock me. And I will silence any tongue that dares again. The hall was silent, cowed beneath his fury. Lyra's cheeks burned, tears spilling freely, not only from shame, but from a strange, aching relief. For though he had exposed her further, though her humiliation deepened, he had also claimed her publicly, fiercely, without shame of his own. And in that moment, she realized that Riker's dominance was not only her prison, it was her shield. That night, when they returned to the chamber, Riker's voice was softer, though still laced with command. Do not weep for their whispers. You are mine, and in time, Lyra, you will see that being mine is greater than any crown. She trembled beneath his eyes, torn between despair and dangerous devotion. And though her heart broke under the weight of his obsession, another part of her whispered the truth she feared most. She needed his claim as much as he needed her obedience. The court had been silenced. Lady Seraphina's smirk was gone, her whispers crushed beneath Riker's thunderous declaration. Before the nobles, before the throne, he had claimed Lyra not as a weakness, but as his own. Yet that night, when the chamber doors shut and the torches burned low, the king's eyes did not blaze with victory. They carried something else, something heavy and unspoken. Lyra sat upon the edge of the bed, her hands twisting the sheets, her cheeks still hot from the shame of the day. Her heart beat frantically, her mind a storm. The whispers of the court still clung to her skin, but so too did his words. This is not weakness. This is obedience. This is mine. She had felt both crushed and shielded in that moment, both ruined and claimed, and she could not untangle which feeling burned deeper. Now he stood across the chamber, his hands braced against the stone mantel, his back to her. His chest rose and fell with harsh breaths, as if each one fought some invisible war inside him. At last he spoke, his voice low, gravel rough. I have ruined you. Lyra froze, her lips parting in shock. My lord. He turned, and for the first time, she saw torment etched into his face. Not rage, not hunger, not command, torment. You were innocent, he said, each word breaking, untouched, pure. And I have made you this. Trembling, broken, shamed before me and before them. I have fed my hunger on your fear until there is nothing left. Her throat tightened. Tears stung her eyes. I cannot stop, he continued, his voice rising, cracking with something close to despair. Every night, I tell myself it will be the last, that I will not demand more, that I will not strip you further. But I do, and I will, because when I see you obey, when I see you burn with shame and yet still bear yourself for me. His fists clenched. I am undone. You are my curse. Lyra, her breath trembled, her tears falling freely. She had never heard him speak so raw, so unguarded. For the first time, she saw not only the king who commanded her shame, but the man devoured by it. He stepped closer, his eyes dark and desperate. His voice dropped, hoarse with truth. And yet, you are my salvation. The chamber was silent, save for their breaths. Lyra's heart broke and burned all at once. She wanted to hate him, to recoil, to scream that he had shattered her life and stolen her innocence. And yet, she could not deny the other truth that had crept into her veins, that somewhere in her trembling, in her shame, she had begun to crave his eyes, to need his claim, to feel alive only when his gaze consumed her. She whispered, her voice fragile but steady, "Then I will be both." His breath caught, his eyes widening. He stared at her as though she had struck him, as though her words had torn away the last shield he carried. Lyra, he whispered, her name a broken prayer. He sank to his knees before her, his hands braced on either side of her as he leaned close, his forehead pressing against hers. For the first time, he touched her not in command, not in cruelty, but in torment. "You do not understand what you say," he murmured, his voice shaking. "To be my curse is to be destroyed. To be my salvation is to be devoured. There is no life left for you beyond me." Her tears slid down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as they rose, hesitating, then resting lightly against his chest. "I know." He closed his eyes, a guttural sound escaping him. His body trembled, torn between restraint and surrender. For years he had believed no one could endure his hunger. But now she stood before him, not resisting, not fleeing, but offering herself to the darkness he carried. That night, he still watched her, still commanded her to bear herself. But his eyes no longer burned only with hunger. They carried torment, and beneath the torment, something fragile, almost unbearable, need. As she lay in silence afterward, her body trembling from both shame and secret desire, Lyra knew the truth had been spoken. She was his curse. She was his salvation. And for both of them, there would be no turning back. The night after her whispered vow, "Then I will be both," the chamber was charged with a tension Lyra could not name. Riker's eyes had softened only slightly, just enough to unseat her heart. And yet, as the bolt slid into place once more, she knew his hunger had not lessened. If anything, it had sharpened. He stood before her, tall and unyielding, his voice low but commanding. On the bed, "Open for me." Her body trembled, but something inside her twisted. For days she had bent, obeyed, endured humiliation until her shame had become ritual. But tonight, a flame of resistance flickered. Perhaps it was her exhaustion, or the torment of the court's whispers still burning her skin. Perhaps it was the ache of being seen as nothing but his fetish. Her lips parted, her voice fragile but firm. "No." The word cut through the chamber like a blade. Riker froze, his eyes narrowing, disbelief flashing across his face. "What did you say?" Her chest heaved, her heart slamming in her ribs, but she did not retreat. "I will not. Not tonight. I cannot. I will not bear myself again for a heartbeat." Silence. Then fury erupted in his eyes, dark and blazing. He stepped forward, his presence suffocating, his voice a growl that rattled the air. "You dare defy me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head stubbornly. "I am not only your ritual. I am your wife, and I cannot be this forever." His hand slammed against the bedpost, the wood shuddering. She flinched, gasping. But his rage was not mindless. It was laced with desperation, fear, torment. "You do not understand," he snarled. If you do not obey, I unravel. If you defy me, I am lost. Do you want me undone? Do you want her king to break? Her tears spilled over, her voice breaking. And what of me? Am I not already broken? The words struck him like a spear. For a moment, his fury faltered. His chest heaved, his jaw tightened, his eyes burned not only with rage, but with pain. But then his cruelty returned, sharpened by desperation. He grabbed her wrist, forcing her onto the bed, but did not touch her as a lover would. He held her there, his voice rough, broken. If you will not obey me, then you will be denied. You will know nothing but ache. You will beg for what you now withhold. Her body trembled as he released her wrist, stepping back. His eyes devoured her, but he did not command her to open. He only stood there, arousal visible, hunger gnawing, yet holding himself back with brutal restraint. Lie there, he growled, and know that I could command you. I could force you, but I will not. You will ache, Lyra. You will burn with the fire you pretend you do not crave, and you will beg for me before this night is done. She turned her face away, sobbing, but heat coiled low in her belly. Her body betrayed her once more, the ache intensifying even as her mind screamed rebellion. Minutes stretched into hours. He did not touch her, did not order her. He only stood watching, his chest heaving with barely contained torment. The silence between them grew unbearable, thick with tension, desire, and fury. At last, Lyra broke. Her body writhed against the sheets, her breath ragged. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Please." His eyes narrowed. "Please what?" She shook her head, ashamed, unable to speak the words. "Say it," he demanded, his voice raw. "Say that you will obey." Her lips trembled, her pride warring with her body, with the fire that consumed her. But the ache was too much, the silence too heavy, the need too sharp. At last, her whisper cracked the air. I will obey." Riker groaned, guttural, undone. His eyes blazed with triumph and torment. He stepped closer, his voice trembling with both cruelty and relief. "You're mine, Lyra, even in rebellion. Especially in rebellion. Do not forget, you are my curse and my salvation, and I cannot bear your defiance." Her tears fell freely, her body trembling beneath him. And she knew the truth. His torment was her prison, and her rebellion was a chain that bound them both tighter than obedience ever had. That night, she obeyed again, not because he forced her, but because her body and heart could not endure the denial. And though Riker's fury had shaken the walls, beneath it, she glimpsed the fragile truth. His cruelty was not only dominance, it was desperation. For he could not survive her defiance, and she could not survive his obsession. The night after her rebellion, Lyra lay awake long after Riker had stilled. His chest rose and fell with the heavy rhythm of sleep, but even in slumber, his hand twitched, his jaw clenched, as though the battle with her defiance still raged inside him. She watched him, her mind burning. He cannot bear it when I refuse. The thought struck her with the sharpness of a blade. For nights, she had believed she was powerless, stripped of choice, bound by his gaze and commands. But last night had shown her something else. When she had denied him, even for a heartbeat, he had broken. His fury unraveling into desperation, his hunger clawing at his restraint. He needs me, not his wife, not his queen, not even his mate. He needs my obedience, my shame, my trembling, and only I can give it to him. The realization filled her with something she had not felt since the day she was bartered into his hands. Power. Fragile, dangerous, but hers. The next night, when the bolt slid shut, Riker turned to her with the same burning hunger. "On the bed," he commanded. Open. Her heart pounded. But instead of rushing to obey, she hesitated. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his, trembling but steady. Riker froze, his gaze sharpening, his chest rising. "Do not test me." Lyra, her lips parted. "And if I do?" Silence crashed between them, his jaw clenched, his fists curling. For a moment, she thought his rage would break him again, but instead his breath shuddered, his hunger spiking. "You would not dare," he growled, though his voice trembled beneath its strength. Lyra swallowed hard. Fear coiled in her belly, but so too did something hotter, the thrill of seeing him unsettled. She stepped closer, slowly loosening the ties of her gown. His eyes followed every movement, sharp, consuming, but she paused halfway, letting the fabric cling to her shoulders. "If you want more," she whispered, "you must ask." Riker's nostrils flared. His body trembled with restraint, with disbelief. He had commanded kings, slaughtered enemies, silenced courts with a word. But here, before his bride, he hesitated because her words struck the heart of his fetish, his need to watch, to command, to devour her obedience. And in that hesitation, Lyra felt it again. Power. His voice cracked low, guttural. "Bear yourself, Lyra." She drew the gown lower, baring herself to his gaze. But this time, her trembling carried not only shame, it carried control. She watched his eyes widen, his chest heave, his arousal strain, and she realized she could make him hunger, make him ache, make him beg without ever disobeying fully. For the first time, his obsession was hers to wield. Riker stepped closer, his breath ragged. His voice dropped to a growl of need. "You play with fire, little bride. Do you not see? This game will burn us both." Her lips trembled. "Then let it burn." He groaned, guttural, undone. His hands clenched at his sides, his entire body trembling as though he were holding back a storm. His gaze devoured her, but beneath the hunger was something fragile. Fear. Fear that she had discovered the truth, that his crown, his throne, his kingdom meant nothing compared to her obedience. She alone could ruin him, and she knew it now. That night, when she finally lay beneath his gaze, Lyra felt no victory, no triumph, only the dangerous thrill of power newly tasted. Her shame still burned her, but it no longer felt only like chains. It felt like a weapon, and Riker, the king feared by all, lay restless at her side, undone not by enemies or armies, but by the fragile bride who had learned she could command the king by obeying on her own terms. The air in the chamber that night was thick with unspoken tension. Lyra had tasted power, a dangerous, intoxicating truth that she could wield his obsession as much as he wielded her obedience. She lay on the bed, her pulse fluttering, while Riker stood across the room, watching her with a gaze sharper than any blade. But something was different in his eyes. No longer only hunger, no longer only command. Tonight there was a challenge. He stepped forward, his voice low, steady, terrifying in its restraint. "Tonight, I will not touch you." Her breath caught. She blinked, stunned. "My lord, you will bear yourself. You will pleasure yourself. You will obey every command I give. But I will not lay a finger on you. You will burn, and I will burn with you. And when dawn comes, we will both know the truth of what binds us." Her cheeks flushed hot, her heart pounding. The thought of his eyes on her without his touch, of performing every act for him alone, filled her with dread and forbidden heat. Tears pricked her eyes. Why? Why do this? His jaw clenched, his chest heaving. "Because if I touch you, I will consume you. And if I consume you, I will lose myself. Tonight, I want to see if you're mine without my hands. If my gaze alone is enough to undo you." Her throat went dry. She wanted to resist, but the fire in his eyes left no room for denial. "Begin," he ordered. Her hands shook as she loosened her gown, slipping it from her shoulders, baring herself to his consuming gaze. She trembled, her breath uneven, shame flooding her. But beneath it, that traitorous ache flared to life once more. "Wider," he commanded. She obeyed, her tears slipping free, her body trembling as his eyes devoured her. Every flinch, every gasp, every ragged breath fed his hunger, sharpened his restraint. His fists clenched at his sides, his arousal straining, but he held himself back with brutal will. "Touch yourself," he growled. Her sob broke the silence. Shame twisted inside her, but her hand obeyed, trembling as it drifted downward. Her body betrayed her again, heat pooling, breath quickening, her lips parting with helpless sounds she tried to swallow. Riker's chest heaved, his eyes blazing as though he were watching the holiest of rituals. His voice cracked guttural. "Do not stop. Not until I say," she gasped, tears streaking her cheeks as her body burned beneath his gaze. Her mind screamed in humiliation, but her body arched, obeyed, surrendered. Every second was agony. Every second was ecstasy, and both of them were undone by it. At last, his growl filled the chamber, breaking through his restraint. Enough, her hands stilled, her chest heaving, her body trembling on the edge of collapse. She looked at him through tear-blurred eyes, seeing the torment etched into his face. His hunger roared in him, his restraint a chain cutting into his own flesh. He stepped forward at last, towering over her, his voice raw. "You are mine, Lyra, not by touch, not by chains, but by the fire that consumes us both." Her tears fell freely, her lips trembling. And in that moment, she whispered the truth neither of them could deny. "Yes, my king, I am yours." His breath shuddered, his eyes darkening with a mix of triumph and torment. And though he had not touched her all night, both of them knew their bond had sealed deeper than flesh, forged in fire, shame, and surrender. As dawn crept through the windows, Lyra lay spent and trembling, her body aching, her heart torn between ruin and devotion. Riker stood over her, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, his eyes still devouring her. Neither had touched the other, and yet both were undone more than ever before. And in the silence, one truth lingered, undeniable. They belonged to each other in torment, in desire, in ruin. The dawn after the night of watching, Lyra sat by the window, her gown drawn close, her body still trembling from the fire that had consumed her without a single touch. Riker had,